A very good evening to everyone. Hello and welcome to Citti Media. I'm your host Sharan Sethi. On this special broadcast on the occasion of Republic Day, we are joined again by the gentle giant of the Indian Army, Lieutenant General Syed Ata Hasnain. Sir, a very good evening to you, sir.
Jai Hind to all our
Namaste.
viewers and a happy Republic Day.
It's Happy Republic Day to you and all our viewers. And it's already been 2 months. It felt like we had this conversation 2 weeks ago. So one never knows how time flies, especially amid the pandemic. And I hope you and your family are all keeping safe.
We are all very safe, and I hope all our viewers, everyone is also safe and secure in their homes.
Thank you so much for your kind words and concerns. So let me begin by asking you this. If you were to glance at the security developments over the last 1 year, and we have also been facing a pandemic which has put an additional burden on the entire defense apparatus, what would be the main highlights according to you, sir?
See, Sharan, when you look at national security, you got to look at it from a comprehensive point of view. And from that point of view, there's no doubt that the pandemic itself and the period of April, May leading up to June, when the Delta variant was really raging all over India, that was a very, very important time. We overcame this problem with resilience. This entire challenge was overcome with national resilience. Compliments to the government, compliments to the people, compliments to the medical fraternity, and compliments to the security forces that we came out shining from it still. But it was a terrible experience. It put us down. It put us down economically. And when you are put down economically, it obviously affects your national security. So I would say that is a huge challenge which came our way. The second thing was, of course, handling this whole business of Afghanistan and the fallout. We were secure in 20 years that our western flank was reasonably secure. And the American presence there ensured that the Afghanistan was stable, reasonably stable. Pakistan did not have the ability to be able to do something out of the box completely. To that extent, therefore, and we were into the job of actually assisting the Americans and bringing about stabilization of Afghanistan, stretching into Central Asia and things like that. All of a sudden, all this disappeared. And disadvantaged Pakistan became advantaged Pakistan to a great extent. And that upset the apple cart to some extent. You see, the Modi government has made some great strides as far as the Middle East is concerned. It had some good relationships established with most of the Gulf nations. UAE and Saudi Arabia are two of the most important nations of that region, right? And similarly, we had a good relationship with Afghanistan, which was progressing at that time. And suddenly, when that happened, we were left a little bit floundering, should I say, as to what should be our options as far as the Taliban is concerned. Mercifully, in the last 3 months of the year, we came out fairly well, despite those challenges. We came out fairly well with the National Security Advisor, his initiative of calling in the NSAs of the Central Asian republics and other important stakeholders to Delhi, the Russian visit of the Russian president to Delhi, our outreach to the Central Asian nations and our outreach to Afghanistan itself with humanitarian aid. All this has put should I say, much of what was lost has already been regained. So these were some of the major challenges. I would say, of course, that Chinese presence in Ladakh continued to be more of a pinpricks than anything else at the moment, because this year we really didn't see any major effects of the standoff as such, except the fact that the Chinese refused to withdraw from those areas and continue to seem to be holding those friction points. Only time will tell as to what will really happen in the near future as far as the LAC is concerned.
So going forward in 2022, would you say that dealing with the Chinese would perhaps be the primary security concern for India? Because in the last few years, we've seen that it's slowly tilting away from Pakistan and it's more China-centric. And also we have several domestic developments on this security front that India needs to be worried about. So can you put things into perspective for our viewers?
I would not like to give it priorities and numbers, because I do think that the moment you start doing it, then you lose sight of certain things here and there. It's
Okay.
very important to keep your focus shifting from place to place and yet maintaining a balance.
Right.
Yes, the LAC and the Chinese front is very important, but I won't say that that is the only area of importance. The Western Front continues to occupy our attention and must continue to occupy our attention. We must remember that Pakistan is now free to a great extent, although the perception in Pakistan is that it is advantage Pakistan because of Afghanistan. But we are also aware in our analyses that it's not so rosy as what Pakistan may imagine. But Pakistan probably perceives that with it guiding the Chinese as far as their Afghan policy is concerned, their policy towards the new great game area is concerned, perhaps they've got an advantage. And to that extent, India may not respond so proactively to any action or misadventure which Pakistan may wish to try and do in Jammu and Kashmir or Punjab or any other place like that. So I would say our attention must equally be there and as much on the LAC. It's important in terms of foreign policy to continue maintaining our equilibrium. It's very good that we have maintained our relationship with Russia. The visit of the Russian president has been a very good thing.
Right.
But we must at the same time continue to build up on our relationship, which is progressing as far as our strategic partnership with the United States is concerned. The Indo-Pacific is an area of concern. We are needed there. We are needed in the Indian Ocean area in particular. And our importance to the Quad, our importance to the United States and its partners must be realized and must be executed. And lastly, I think internal security, you're very correct, very rightly brought out by you. Internal security is a very important thing. Jammu and Kashmir itself, extending a hand of terror, probably reaching out into Punjab. That is something which has not happened yet, but this is something which one suspects could happen if Pakistan wishes to try and experiment with things here. The Northeast, with this recent problems with ASPA, etc., must also not be lost sight of, and we must maintain our equilibrium as far as our conduct of operations is concerned all over the Northeast, because things can go bad there all of a sudden, as it happened with the recent incident. The Red Corridor, to my mind, seems to be reasonably secure at the moment. The police forces have done a fairly good job, but what is very important is this whole business of internal divisiveness. We can't afford to do this. We can't, especially in southern India. The kind of networks which still probably exist with what is happening in Afghanistan, what's happening in northern Afghanistan, particularly, the gravitation of terror into those areas. You don't know, the upsurge of terrorism internationally may take place once again. And if that happens, then obviously these networks which are there in southern India may suddenly come alive again. So we cannot forget what happened 2 years ago in Sri Lanka. Much of what happened there, the roots of that lay in our own southern states. So this is something that we got to be very careful about.
And this is one of the reasons perhaps why NIA is also advocating for several centers to be set up in the South, I think.
I think so. That's exactly one of the major reasons for it, because we are aware that, you see, it's not as if there are attacks taking place. It's not as if there is manifestation of violence taking place. But the moment you are aware that there are networks which are emerging, financial, drug networks, ideological and media networks and things like that, overground worker networks, sleeper agent networks, when these things are becoming evident to your own intelligence agencies, obviously they are going to be alive to it and will respond to that.
Yes, sir. You bring up some very important points, and especially with what has happened, some of the unfortunate incidents in the Northeast, winning hearts and minds is becoming more difficult, and it's imperative that we keep the civil society also in very good relations with the Indian Army, and that's the way forward. But before we get into that, you did briefly touch upon Pakistan, and you've commented about this, but I would like to hear in detail what your observations are as far as the newly drafted national security policy of Pakistan is concerned.
That's a very interesting issue which has risen right at the end of the year. They say that Pakistan has spent 7 years drafting that policy, and it's a 100-page policy as far as the the classified portion is concerned. We don't know what's there in the classified portion.
Right.
The unclassified portion is 62 pages. Of course, those 62 pages has as many as 8 blank pages within it, the folder itself, and lots of other such little bits of writings here and there. So it comes out to about 34, 35 pages of writing. Now, the orientation of this national security policy seems to be a realization in Pakistan that Pakistan has lost its way economically. And therefore, geoeconomics is probably the thing which they are attempting to look at very seriously. So much of this policy is focusing on geoeconomics, not so much on geopolitics, although there are references, of course, to foreign policy and things like that. But there are references to India. There are a couple of paragraphs on India. There are paragraphs on Jammu and Kashmir, on internal security, on terror, and things like that. But none of this reflect any change. There is no change which is noticeable in any of the writings. Of course, at the same time, it's also very, very noticeable that the policy does not appear to be very acidic in content, right? Obviously, the classified portion will have all that. This is more a projection. It is to tell the world, see, Pakistan has evolved is trying to evolve itself into a modern state. All that image build-up which has taken place in the west of Pakistan being the core center of terror, etc., is all a fabrication. See, we are also equally concerned about terror, and internal security is very dear to us. For us, it's equally important to get hold of the terrorists, to neutralize the terrorists. This is the kind of projection which is being put out to the world.
Right.
Not that the world is going to absorb this and believe it so easily. It will want to see what's behind those 100 pages of the classified aspect, which will obviously bear the more important aspects of the national security policy.
Right. And it's not as if conventionally Pakistan has been that kind of a power which calls for a rules-based order or something, or at least respect certain things in a playbook. So that's one of the concerns. And do you also think, as a small follow-up, if I may ask you, is the newly proposed strategy towards geoeconomics display a degree of overdependence again on China? If that is so, I think it's rather counterproductive, isn't it?
In this particular document, it doesn't become very evident, because it seems that from a foreign policy and geoeconomics angle, there is a certain amount of equanimity. A lot of importance is given to the Gulf. A lot of importance is given to China, including, of course, even trade with India. But that is subject to, you're aware of change of government and change of philosophy here and things like that, right? So Pakistan is generally treating, is giving a lot of importance to China. But at the same time, there is a projection that the United States, the Western world, is as important. Just remember that if Pakistan has to seek more IMF loans tomorrow, it is ultimately the United States, right? It's the US which will endorse that, and only then will those loans actually manifest and come about. So it cannot. This kind of a policy cannot overtly sort of focus on nations, on one single nation or a set of nations, etc. It will try and spread itself quite evenly as a policy. And that's exactly what the framers of this policy are.
Okay. So you also mentioned, we were talking about the Northeast as well. And we all recall the unfortunate incident that happened a few weeks or months ago. Keeping that in mind, these were the episodes that perhaps happened a few decades ago, and it's no longer seen that frequently, at least. And you've handled very sensitive situations in places like Kashmir. So if you could share a few personal anecdotes and give some guidance as to how we can be more sensitive while handling loss like AFSPA, what would your recommendations be?
See, one thing is clear. We are now 30 years into the Kashmir proxy conflict. We are almost 64 years into what's happening in the Northeast. Lots of lessons have been learned. Generations have changed. One thing is very clear. You cannot treat counterinsurgency, counterterrorism as a one-way thing in which everything seems to be empowerment of the armed forces, the army, or things like that, right? There has to be a compromise. This is clearly realized by all of us. While the army is very much empowered to do what it wills, there will be mistakes. There will be mistakes which will be made as it was made here, and we should be brave enough to be able to admit these mistakes.
Right.
This incident which happened was a deeply regretful incident, and I would apologize to a great extent and express my regrets to the people of Nagaland, to the Mon district people where this happened, and I hope it is never repeated again. So, keeping that aspect in mind and my experience of this, my opinion is, and a lot of people disagree, a lot of people agree with me, it's about time we looked at AFSPA afresh. And no one is saying remove AFSPA, no one is saying remove the disturbed areas labeled from these districts. But AFSPA doesn't appear to be projecting the right kind of image internationally to the human rights community, to the people themselves. Someone who reads AFSPA and looks at the 7 sections of AFSPA looks upon it as a very a law which does not have sensitivity built into it. I know, and these are internal security situations in which sensitivity is a very important aspect. So I have written about this and got a lot of comments on it also. It's a debate which must be initiated. I'm not going to be entirely right. There are a lot of things that lots of people can contribute to it, but I think this law should only consist of 2 sections and just 2 lines each. And that is the first section on empowering the army to carry out its operations without reference to a civil authority. And the number 2 should be just the protection extended to the soldier for inadvertent mistakes which may take place in the pursuit of his operations. Right? These are the only 2 things. And along with it, there should be a bundle of appendices of explanatory notes to say how this law should be executed. For example, I can share with you that 4 things I would love to see in this law so that everyone can read it. Number 1, I would like to see the do's and don'ts of the Supreme Court, which were given out in 1997. Who knows about the existence of these rules? People don't even know about them. They just read the AFSPA, they don't know. Supreme Court has given you a set of do's and don'ts. Second thing, who knows about the Army Chief's 10 Commandments? 1994, these 10 Commandments were spelled out. Every soldier was required to carry this in his pocket. It may not be done today, but you should be aware of these. And it's actually a set of guidelines to you as to how you should approach these operations and how people-friendly operations have to be conducted. The third thing is the guiding principles of Operation Sadbhavna, which is extended to the Northeast and to Jammu and Kashmir also. That is all about winning hearts and minds. Now, Indian Army is one of those armies which pursues this great seriousness. And the last part, a small section on giving out the standard operating procedure which is followed for conduct of search and destroy operations. Right. You'll be surprised when one reads this, you will be surprised that the army is actually given guidelines to ensure the way that it conducts its operations. Now, when you read all this and you make people read it, you realize, my God, this is such a sensitive, the law is so sensitive to the requirements of the people. And that is the necessity at the moment.
Thank you so much for sharing that, sir. And I think you're right, because even as children, while we were growing up in school, there is an overreach, and there's so much literature that spoke negatively of AFSPA, and a lot of it was right, perhaps. So I think even in the younger generation's memory, AFSPA is seen in a very different light. So going forward, at least there needs to be a relook into what has happened and what needs to be there. Going forward, because we've evolved, the security situation also has evolved in the Northeast. If I may ask you a few questions surrounding the controversies that's happened in the last few days, sir. One last question I would like to ask before we wrap up this interview is Punjab elections are around the corner. So obviously there's a political element involved with this issue as well. But if we were to dissect that and just look at the serious security concern that's facing Punjab today or is about to face Punjab, how do you think India should deal with it, and how serious is this issue, sir?
See, the potential of Punjab being exploited. The extension of the footprint of terror from Jammu and Kashmir spreading into Punjab is very much alive, but it's not as if it's happening tomorrow, today or tomorrow. immediately. What we have to be aware and conscious of is that the conditions are being created for that, right? Political divisiveness, communal divisiveness, sleeper agent networks, financial conduits, drug networks coming into this, drones being flown in, arms being supplied. These are the typical indicators of this kind of a thing which emanates subsequently. This is what we have to be conscious of. It can happen that the area of Jammu, Samba, stretching into the Ravi corridor, coming down to Gurdaspur. This is the area into which this whole thing spreads initially before spreading into the rest of Punjab as such. Pakistan failed to do it the last time. They failed to do it in the 80s. They tried their best. It is the people of Punjab who defeated this whole attempt to try and escalate the issue in Punjab. We have to make sure that this time again, the people of Punjab remain as motivated. They are, you can't find greater nationalists than people of Punjab themselves. The politics of Punjab, politics all over the country, need to go up to a level. Of course, politics means divisiveness, up to a division of opinion and things like that. Up to a level they can go, but they can't go beyond that. The moment it goes beyond that, then it starts affecting national security. Yes. And this is what we have to be aware of. And this is what is one of perhaps the job of the media to a great extent. The veteran community of the armed forces, of the intelligence communities, etc., to remain sensitive of this. The think tanks, this is one of the very important responsibilities of think tanks, to keep writing on this and things, to keep sensitizing people on this. Because if you don't, people are going to be unaware of it. And that's what will be exploited. That's exactly what will be exploited by our adversaries. So I would say, well, Punjab is not yet worrisome. No. Politics are there. Politics will be played out. It's a state under elections, and elections are always a period of a bit of a churn and a bit of a turbulence. You can't expect straight-faced elections to be taking place. Yeah. So with all this happening, as long as we've got our eyes on the scanner and making sure we are looking at those blips taking place here and there, I think Punjab should be manageable in the near future.
Words of wisdom coming from you, sir. And I agree. We live in a time where binaries are much more stronger and the fault lines are much more visible. And being a journalist, although I'm young, I can admit that there are a lot of people who don't deal with national security issues and defense issues with sensitivity and care. So I hope that people do educate themselves more on this. And
absolutely, that is the more important thing.
As far as political debates are concerned, you can have all sorts of buffoonery on camera, but I think when it comes to national security, it should not be compromised.
Very well said. Absolutely.
Thank you so much, sir, for joining us. It was an absolute honor and a pleasure talking to you again.
Always a pleasure being with you. Thank you so much.
Jai Hind, sir.
Jai Hind.
Please remember to subscribe to us and switch on the notifications for this channel. For our other social media links, more content, and to support our work, please visit citti.net. Dhanyavad. Namaskar.